Good evening, good evening, good evening. Let me welcome you to this evening's presentation of Mango Tree Dialogues, a forum in which we try to distill the issues of the day and hopefully issues that you are interested in as much as I am. We're getting more into the winter, and I know many of us will breathe a sigh of relief that we're leaving the very hot days of summer. And as it is now, even in October, we are still experiencing quite some very hot temperatures. As a matter of fact, I think today, in parts of the world, we are experiencing over 85 degrees, and some probably well over 90 degrees. As I've said repeatedly on this program, we are faced with a situation of climate change that is, I would think, has become quite normative. In fact, the scientists are saying that that is so, that we are into a new normal where the climate is concerned, which means that where we are now, there's no point at which we can return to where we were, say, about 10 or so years ago. And if anything, unless we can do something to stem the progression towards greater deterioration in the climate, in terms of it getting hotter and hotter, we could very well see a catastrophe out in the future. It does not give us a great deal of encouragement, frankly, to think like that. But I think that there's still many things that are within our remit as human beings to gain wisdom and to do the things that are right, despite all the problems that we have in the world today, because the very survival of life on this planet. And when it comes to climate, you know that it is no respecter of political parties or political leadership in any country, anywhere in the world. It is no respecter of persons. And you see that terrible flooding that took place in Spain just, I think, yesterday, and how many lives were lost, and how suddenly the floods just decimated that part of Spain, damaging buildings, smashing cars, a lot of lives being lost. So all I'm saying, friends, is that we're really into a new normal, but we can still prevent the worst from happening. And I hope that the kind of leadership, political leadership around the world will do the right thing, gain a heart of wisdom and do the right thing. All right. Now, what are the things that are on my mind this evening? As you know, we talk about Jamaican and Caribbean diaspora concerns on this program. And this evening, I want to comment on with respect to Jamaica, the finance minister, well, he's now the ex-finance minister, Dr. Nigel Clark, has now left the country to take up his new appointment, or at least has officially resigned from government to take up his new appointment with the International Monetary Fund as one of its deputy managing directors. People keep saying that he is going to be the managing director the deputy managing director of the fund, but that is not really correct, because there are 4 deputy managing directors, and he's going to go there now to take up one of those posts. So just a little clarification. It's not a matter of nitpicking, but just to give the facts. So I want to share a few thoughts on that and what the development has been in the country as a result of him going. And I want to say something about Cuba. Very briefly about Cuba, the embargo, and what is happening in that country with the blackouts that have been taking place there recently. And then finally, I want to conclude with saying something about the US elections. We are now just 5 days away, and some people would say, hooray! Thank God for that. we'll soon be having this thing behind us, but not so fast. Not so fast. We'll have the elections on the 5th, but that will not be the end of it. You can rest assured. But at least a date, the date would have been met, and we will deal with other things as they evolve. All right, so Jamaica, a lot of things have been happening in the country. There's never a dull moment, in Jamaica. There's always something to tickle the imagination or to cause some laughter or to cause some sadness or. But anyway, that is Jamaica, one of the best countries that you'd really want to be. And very wonderful people, despite the severe social problems that we have at home. The people of Jamaica themselves are very loving people. And really do have concern for one another, despite the bad news that you get from time to time. The hospitality and the level of compassion that is still in the hearts of Jamaicans is unparalleled in many parts of the world. And I can say that without any fear of contradiction. All right, so the Finance Minister, Dr. Nigel Clark, he had announced about 2 months ago that he would be leaving office, take up this very prestigious appointment with the International Monetary Fund. I was going to say more fondly called, but more easily called the IMF. That you want to say the IMF, people tend to relate to it very readily. You say the International Monetary Fund, it sounds so kind of esoteric. But when you say the IMF, certainly for Jamaica, for the long history that we have had with the fund, when you say the IMF, that drives some kind of fear in people's minds, especially those who have lived through the experience of the 70s and 80s, and even going all the way into the 2000s under the IMF, that the kind of fear and dread that is often associated with that acronym is very palpable. And but we readily identify the organization when we say the IMF. The IMF. All right, so he got that work, and he had said that at the end of October, which would be today, he would be, leaving to take up that appointment. And so, of course, the question that came into vogue is what would happen to the finance portfolio. Because I think most Jamaicans, even his worst detractors, would agree that Nigel Clark did a very splendid job as Minister of Finance, handling the financial affairs of the country in the 6 years in which he was privileged, 6.5, I think, years in which he was privileged to do that. And he brought a refreshing sense of being able to not just understand figures, but to see how these figures relate to people's lives. And he approached his work with a sense of, I would say, compassion. Yes, I'll use that word. Because compassion is not a word you use easily of finance ministers. they're the ones who come with the taxes, they're the ones who come with the draconian measures, they're the ones who cause the interest rates to go up, statutory interest rates. And so whatever burdens that people experience in a particular country, they tend to associate those burdens with the finance minister, with the government of the day, but with especially the man who is in charge or the woman who is in charge of the finances of the country. And he was not spared, like other finance ministers before him, the brickbats of people hitting at him for things that he might have done and not done. There's always some new project that could be done. There's a pothole that could be fixed. There is an area that could have electricity, and you understand what I'm talking about. But he was not just absorbed with figures, which he understood very well and was able to calibrate to make sure, when he looked, he's a trained mathematician. He's a PhD in mathematics from Oxford. I mean, you can't go higher than that, can you? And so he understood figures, and I think his training was particularly in dealing with quantifications and so on, I think. But so he left, the government in Parliament on Tuesday had a farewell, for him, and many members of the House spoke, and we here at Mango Tree Dialogues would like to wish the minister all the very best, and in his new assignment, it will be a 5-year assignment. After that, who knows what he will do, whether he'll return to Jamaica or whether he may just move on to be the director of the IMF. He has that qualification. He will hone a lot of experience, and it is not just an honor to him personally and to his family, but it is to the country and to the Caribbean region, to the whole Latin American region, I would say, but especially to the Caribbean and Jamaica, that we could have a son of the soil being elevated to that high position in international, as an international civil servant at the IMF. It's a signal honor. And so we wish him well as he goes. And I hope that everything will work out fine for him. All right. When he did announce, there are many people in Jamaica who were understandably concerned about who would replace him and what would that look like, because there are many who are saying that he had done such a wonderful job and in holding things together and getting the country to a stage of fiscal responsibility and strength, despite the pandemic and despite the horrendous borrowing over the years that has made it very difficult for the country to really do a lot of the things that it needs to do as a country. So there were people who are understandably concerned about what would now happen, with him going. Would things fall apart? As a matter of fact, some people even suggested that he was jumping ship. That he saw what was coming and decided to get out while the going was good. But I don't think that is the case for sure. But there were still concerns, and people should have those concerns as to who his replacement would be. So the Prime Minister yesterday announced the replacement, and the person who will succeed him at the Ministry of Finance is who has succeeded him at the Ministry of Finance as I speak now, is former Minister of Education, Mrs. Fayval Williams. She's the new Minister of Finance for Jamaica. She is not new to the political circuit for sure. She is the member of parliament for in one of the St. Andrew constituencies. And she has been in government. She's formerly the minister of a state minister in the Ministry of Finance and Minister of Science, Technology, Energy at one point. And then, of course, Minister of Education. So she has been around. But the question is, does she have the credentials to be a finance minister? Well, with the experience that she honed while she was at the Ministry of Finance, it is obvious that she has gathered a lot of experience that can help her in the present portfolio. But the good thing is, and in terms of her bona fides, uh, she's a graduate of Harvard. She did her BA in economics at Harvard, and she went on to do the MBA, Master of Business Administration, at the Wharton School of Business in Pennsylvania. So she has been in the US IELTS, Ivy Leagues, universities, and that's where she studied. And when she graduated, she worked for a while in corporate finance in the United States in different companies, and that kind of prepared her for, coming to Jamaica and making her contribution there as well in the financial space. And now she has been given the job. And initially, what has come forward from many of the financial players and the business players in the country, and this augurs well for her, is that they're very pleased with the appointment of Miss Williams as the new finance minister. Many have congratulated the prime minister for the appointment, and they're very confident. There is a level of confidence that she's going to do a good job at the finance ministry. Well, time will tell. But as for us here at Mango Tree Dialogues, we'll keep our eyes wide open, while at the same time wishing her all the very best as she takes on the very tedious work of being the very first female minister of finance in Jamaica, which is a first for her. She has, boom, blasted through that glass ceiling and is now the first female finance minister for the country. And that says a lot in what is often a kind of, male-dominated space. At least it has been like that right up to the time of her appointment. So, kudos to the Prime Minister for appointing her, and kudos to her for having earned that appointment. And we'd like to, from MTD, from Mango Tree Dialogues, to wish her all the very best and give whatever support we can, whether in critiques or otherwise. But Jamaica needs a kind of firm hand. We are entering into what could be a new phase. We have brought the macroeconomic stability that the country needs to a point of real strength, and the fiscal strength of the country and the country's economy cannot be denied. Over the past 7 years, where we have had no new taxes, and we are now doing a lot of capital projects out of our own pockets. There was a time when we had to go to the international financial community to beg, literally, to get money. And as they saw us coming, the first thing on people's minds was, here come those beggars again. And we were put under severe strictures by the IMF as a result of our borrowing tendencies and the way in which we recklessly use borrowed money as if it was confetti. We hope that that kind of thing is a thing of the past. Many young people don't understand what I'm saying here, because many of them, 30 and under, never lived under a lot of the experiences that people lived under in the horrendous days of the IMF dealing with Jamaica and all the problems that we had, the social and economic upheavals that we have gone through. So when people of my generation say that we don't want to return to that time of borrowing and reckless spending, you can't be borrowing money for recurrent expenditures like paying salaries. If you borrow money, then you must be able to invest it and bring returns, so that you don't have to be going back to the same sources asking for more bread. You should be making your own bakeries and producing your own bread. Well, the country is in a position now to be able to do that. And that is why we have to hold on to that. And we know we'll keep the uh, new finance minister's feet to the fire. Not because you want to unjustly criticize, but because you want to know that what is best for the country is what is going to go forward. We know we can't return to a time having gotten where we are now. But there are signs that, the whole economic thing is changing. And people are now clamoring and wanting to see growth in the economy. We must go for growth. That it has been one of the most elusive things. The last quarter we grew just by, I think, 0.1%. And we're scheduled in this quarter, I think, to probably our last quarter it was to have negative growth in the economy because of the Hurricane Beryl. But it is more than just Hurricane Beryl, I think. So while we have brought balance in terms of the macroeconomic stability of the country, we still have a problem, and it's a problem of growth. How do we now translate this macroeconomic integrity into getting the needed growth, putting money out in the economy, encouraging people to really get out there and to grow the economy and to export more and to earn more foreign exchange? We have a good reserve at $5 billion, but it could be said that some of that money can now be probably eased up. I'm no financier or economic guru for sure, but some of that money now should be looked at probably, and to see how it can be used to leverage, let me say. I'm not saying that you just go in there and take it out and spend it. How do you use that bucketive now that you have, that strength that you have, to leverage growth in the economy? That has to be the concern. And people are going to become more agitated. But, we're moving into an election year too. 2025 will be general election, parliamentary elections in Jamaica, electing prime ministers and so on. So you can, for the next, from here on, I don't see that there's going to be anything radical in terms of getting the country on a path of growth. But the people would be well advised when the time for the election comes, that they do what they have to do to elect the kind of leaders that will continue the kind of progress that we have seen in the economy over the past, say, 10 years. I will go no further than that. So that is what is happening in the financial space there, and we wish, again, Ms. Williams all the best, as we wish Jamaica all the best. It's all about Jamaica. It's never about personalities. Personalities come and they go as they must. But when people pass on, others come and they take their place. And they too have to live. And every generation has a responsibility to see to it that people are taken, you do the best while you are in charge and alive. Okay, you're passing on. This notion that you live forever isn't there. All flesh is grass, and we pass on. But while we are passing on, let's do the best we can to make sure that those who come behind us have even a better time, a better shot at it than we have or than we had. That's why I'm so concerned about the climate change, because the future of the children being born today and those young ones are being cauterized if the climate continues, but I won't get back on that. All right, so all the best, Miss Williams, and all the best as Jamaica moves forward. Now to Cuba. The Cuban Revolution started around 1953 with the Castro brothers and others carrying out a campaign against the dictatorial regime of Fulgencio Batista. They campaigned militarily against the regime and were successful in causing the regime to fall in around 1959. You would understand that the regime under Batista was very close to the United States. And with the fall of the regime, and the new government coming in place under the Castros, under what they call the revolution. The revolution became the sacred symbol. Not only was it sacred, but it was sacrosanct in the eyes of the people. And of course, the Castros became the icons of the revolution. And Castro, he continued in power for over 50 years, and his brother took over. And he demitted office, and now we have, I think, Diego Calon, who is the new Cuban president. Just in a nutshell. So in 1958, under the presidency of Eisenhower, Dwight Eisenhower, there was an embargo that was imposed, a military embargo that was imposed against Cuba. Because you see, Cuba, the revolution developed the concept of the communist regime. And it's very interesting when you study the history, because at the very beginning, the Castro brothers would have wanted to have a good relationship with the United States. In fact, they tried to court that kind of relationship. But then they, given what had happened with the confiscation of properties that were owned by Americans on Cuban soil, and so on, and these properties now becoming properties of the state, plantations and all of these big agricultural holdings now becoming part of the state, which were owned by Americans or associated with American ownership. They developed that tension, of course, between Cuba under the Castros and America. And this continued to be a very pressing problem for the regime, and they had to survive. They had to build international alliances, and that is how they moved into the formation of the communist doctrine, going after the China and the Soviet Union, and aligning themselves with these powers in order to get the help they want or they wanted. So we need to remember that whenever we're talking about how Cuba became communist. It wasn't their intention at the very beginning to go communist. But if your closest neighbor who could help you is fighting against you, then you have to find alliance around the world. And that's how the alliances with the communist regimes came into being, and thus Cuba became a communist country. So can you imagine having a communist country on the doorsteps of the US? They weren't going to be happy with that at all. And of course, there were attempts to, dislodge the regime, and I'm just jumping ahead, to dislodge the the Castro regime by the US. There was an ill-fated attack at one time and under Kennedy, and that failed very dismally. And in 1962, Kennedy imposed trade embargo. So you had the military embargo by Eisenhower in 1958, which continued up to the time of Kennedy in 1962 now, imposing the trade embargo. And so there were sanctions that were officially brought against the regime. It could hardly, certainly it was not going to be trading with the biggest economic power in the world, which was the United States, which was hostile to it. And so, of course, it turned to the ones that could help it, like, again, Russia and China, especially Russia, to get needed help. Remember the missile crisis that Kennedy had to deal with under Khrushchev, Nikita Khrushchev, who was president of Russia. And, that brought the world almost on the brink of nuclear confrontation just because of Cuba and the missiles, that were purportedly being sent to Russia, to Cuba by the Russians. Grave tension, but that was resolved. And so the trade embargo came into being. Now, this trade embargo has continued to this day. It was just this week, I think it was on Tuesday or so, that the General Assembly of the UN, United Nations, for the 32nd time, voted against the continuation of the embargo against Cuba. 32 times. Because the world is not in favor of it. The 180 odd or so members of the UN are not in favor of it. They believe that it is unjust. They believe that Cuba is being punished now. There might have been a time when the sanctions might have been justified, but that was way back in the day. But now there is no justification for these sanctions to continue, citing human rights violations of political prisoners, the beating down the free press, the lack of the ability of people to, protest and all that sort of thing. Those things, yes, still continue under the communist regime. But they continue to because there is this heavy sanction on them that perhaps had it not been, and I'm not justifying the violation of human rights. As a matter of fact, one of the things I've said repeatedly is that, although the Castros, came into being and as leaders of their country, the whole idea of any one person or any one set of persons, whether it is the Politburo in Russia or whether it is the Cuban, parliament under the dictatorship of Castro. But the idea that any one person or group can have total control over people's minds and what they say or think. Cuba has about 11 million people. And I believe that if there was an opening of the country, just like how Gorbachev opened Russia and brought a new sense to Russia until Putin has shut it down again. I'm sure if there was that kind of opening in Cuba, there could have been something better for the people. Yes, they have been good in two things, education and health. And they have poured a lot of resources into those areas so that in many respects, they are the envy of many people in the so-called third world, in the developing countries, in terms of what they have been able to accomplish. But look how much more could have been accomplished if you unleash the creative, innovations of the people to do things. You deny them the use of cell phones in certain ways, as if you put a crimp on their ability to communicate with the outside world because of fear. So the whole idea that should continue is an insult to the world. Barack Obama, when he became president, made some inroads. There was an opening to Cuba. But that was shut down very quickly by Trump when he came in there. Biden has not done anything of worthy of mention in terms of improving the relationship, even picking up from where Barack left off and said, doing certain things. He has been very quiet, as a matter of fact, on the Cuban question. I guess there are many other things that he's probably concerned and obsessed about than to be concerned about Cuba. But the point is that that is what it is. America just continues with this embargo, continues with sanctioning Cuba to the point now that the country is beginning to really feel it, because they have been having some rolling blackouts in that country, national blackouts in that country with the electrical grids going down. This is as a result of years of not being able to properly maintain these grids. And the country can be plunged into a crisis anytime. Because when you don't have light and power, there's so many things that you can't do. So the Cuban people are in a very serious pickle. And so something has to give. And wise leadership would be well advised. In Cuba, wise leadership in Cuba, you have to deal with the crisis. You'll be well advised to re-examine where you are. Not because you want to get out from under the sanctions, but to look again at the kind of philosophy that you're practicing, the political philosophy that you're practicing, and ask yourselves whether it is not more enlightened, a sense of enlightenment for you to change, the strategies and the way in which you're seeking to run the lives of the Cuban people. Ask yourself that question again. I think the time came a long time ago, but if ever there was another time, it is now. Because I can assure the Cuban people that if you don't get the kind of help that you need, don't look to Russia. Putin over there is calling on Kim Jong-un to help him out to fight Ukraine because of his stupid, ill-fated attack on Ukraine. Xi Jinping, he has his worries at home. His economy is not in the doldrums, but tottering because of ill-fated policies coming from the COVID crisis. So which other communist era you're going to be going to? It's time that you sit down and start and reassess your political philosophy and where you want to go and free up the Cuban people. That's what you need to do. And then, if you do that, America may smile at you more favorably. The Cuban lobby in the US, especially in Florida, that is so distinguished in electing, whoever they back for power, and they tend to back the Republicans. There was a time they were with the Democrats, but latter day, mostly now with the Republicans. They'll begin to rethink perhaps their perspective on certain things. I'm just saying that the time has come, one, for Cuban leadership to reassess its priorities and how much they can go in opening up the country and trusting in the dignity of the people to their own self-determination, and not think that a few of them are so bright that they must determine the course for the future. And then America would be well advised to re-examine its policies once they begin to see this new opening. Because you can't just have one without the other in a way. I mean, you want the sanctions lifted, you want all of these things to happen. and yet, but you still want to have your boots on the necks of people. Diego Calon, to give him some credit, has kind of opened things a bit, but in a very timid way. You need to go more full throttle. Because the problems that with the rolling blackout aren't going away. These are just smoke signals of worse to come. Not just with blackouts, but in terms of the economic decline of your country. So I leave that. All right, finally, I want to just say quickly that next Tuesday is voting in America. The 5th of November will be one of the most important days in the history. This 5th of November will be one of the most important days in the history of this country. Many people have said over the past, that the next election, each election is a consequential election, and every election is a consequential election. And by consequential, people generally mean that, it's going to have some real serious implications for the viability and future of the country. It's going to determine very significant things, not just for the present, but for the future. Well, I don't think that there is anybody who has been living in this country in the past, especially over the past 10 years. Unless you're a visitor from Saturn, would not concede that this election, presidential election on Tuesday, next Tuesday, will certainly be one of, and in my view, the most consequential that this country will ever hold. And I say this for this reason. We've never had a time when the country, well, not in recent times. I think around the Civil War, you might have had that. But there has perhaps never been a time in which, in a time of peace and so on, in the modern era, that the country has been so divided along political lines. And the divisions are a function of how the country has conducted itself over the years. I have spoken on this program about what has happened in the past, the way that the natives were treated, blacks who were taken here, and the years of slavery, the era of Jim Crow, and the racism that exists in the country and so on. But in a way that these were kind of muted in many respects. But now everything has just been revealed and opened up, especially since Donald Trump came on the scene and became president of the US and is now contending again to be the president. And I say it because what he's proposing for the country, if he ever gets into power, as I've said many times on this program, will take the country in a direction that not just the citizens of the US will regret, but the entire world will regret. He has promised a number of things. His Project 2025 is a blueprint for dictatorship in the country. He's not somebody who comes across as one who is concerned about real political governance, having a concern for the welfare of the people, because he has demonstrated over and over again that he's more concerned about himself and what his concerns are than he is about anybody else's concern. He has promised that he's going to deal with the enemies within. There are many people inside the country who disagree with him. And he's going in with a very strong sense of grievance arising from the many times in which he thinks that the Department of Justice has been aligned against him in prosecuting him in the criminal indictments that have come against him. And in one of them, in which he became a felon. And even though that was a state case and having nothing to do with the federal government or the Department of Justice, but was a state initiated criminal indictment that eventually caused him to be pronounced a felon by a jury of his own peers of 34 counts. But yet he says the Department of Justice has been weaponized against him. So he's a man filled with anger and grievance. And he has sworn retribution. We've never had a person running for president who has called his opponents enemies and who has promised what he's going to do to them, the retribution that he's going to carry out against them when he gets back into power. And there are many other things that one could consider that he has said, the way he has treated women, his misogyny, his racism, his vile talk, his horrific description of people, calling them names and demeaning their character. That has never happened in our living memory in terms of political campaigns. And yet that is a campaign that he has elected to carry on. And you know what the sad thing is? That if you follow the polls, and as I've said too again many times on this program, I'm not one who is too influenced by the polls because they capture a few things at a given time. And they have proven to be very unreliable indicators of the success or otherwise of political parties in this country, especially recently. You remember in 2022, when they talked about the red wave and the polls were just talking to the Republicans, just sweeping. That never happened at all, and it has happened in many other respects too. So I'm not a very huge believer in them, but they tell you that insofar as you may want to believe them, you would get the impression that Trump is way ahead and that he's going to, win. And if that is really the case, it is really sad that there are so many Americans in this country, so many Americans who have bent the knee to the golden calf that Trump has built, who are willing to suspend their best judgment in supporting somebody who has sworn vengeance, as I've said, and who speaks in the way he does, and who has promised to take this country in directions that will completely, in my view, and probably irreparably, change the character of this country as we have known it. On the other hand, you have a candidate who speaks very eloquently about what she intends to do for the people. She talks policies, while the other person talks grievances and, call people all kinds of names. Incidentally, the word garbage is very interesting that part of the closing argument going into the elections is that word that has become very prominent, garbage. And of course, it came out of an address, a brief address that was given by a comedian at Trump's rally in New York recently at this MSG, Madison Square Gardens, where he called Puerto Ricans, Puerto Rico a floating island of garbage. And Trump has used similar terminology to describe his opponents and the country. Garbage can. Well, Biden, in responding to what happened at Majesty Square Gardens, you know, did something which was very wrong because he intimated, or more than intimated, that the only garbage that he sees out there are Trump supporters, and that is wrong. You never call people garbage, and that has fueled, an unnecessary distraction. I don't think it's sufficient to, upset the apple cart for Harris, because she's not the one who made this statement, and she has distanced herself from it and tried to, bob around it. But that kind of language, we don't need. But it's what I'm saying, it is very interesting that the word garbage has become so prominent in the closing argument of a US presidential election. Who would have thought it? But there we are. So as we go to the polls, then we have to be concerned that it could tilt in one direction or the other. I admit that the elections will be close. I still believe that Kamala Harris will win the elections. And one of the main reasons that I say that is because of the female vote. And I say female, especially the young females who are understandably concerned about their health, their reproductive health. And on this note, I would urge all men who are fathers, husbands, uncles, brothers of your women, the women in your lives, your sisters, your nieces, your wives, your girlfriends, aunts, grandmas, if you're respectful of them at all, to stand up in support of them in the need for, especially those of reproductive age, to defend their bodies. For them, it is an existential problem. And I would say to the young men who have their wives, especially in states like Florida and Texas and Georgia and all of these southern states that have come with these draconian abortion laws that cause people to women to die because they can't get the care that they want. If you live in these states, young men, you have a responsibility to stand up in defense of them. Because if any one of them should get pregnant, like let's say in Georgia, a young man, a young family, has married their wife and she gets pregnant and she gets a complication and she has to get the pregnancy terminated. It isn't going to happen there. And as happened to this young lady, Amber, she bled out in the parking lot because she was not able to get the kind of care that she needed. That could happen to your wife. Sometimes we don't think that this is an existential crisis for these women. That at any time they could be faced with that kind of situation. The family could be put in crisis with that kind of situation. Because an abortion is not a philosophical thing for somebody who is dying because of a complicated pregnancy that is threatening her life. It is a serious life and death issue. And you need to be there for her. And if you want to be there for her, then you must have laws that protect her, not laws that destroy her life. And so if you're going to protect her, who are you going to be voting for? The ones who have put it in place and who are sworn to get even more draconian with it, or the other side. You mightn't like Harris, you mightn't like the other side, but what other options do you have other than the ones who want to really cause problems? Think. That's what I'd say to the young, especially the young men who are equivocating. And if you have voted for Trump already, I can tell you, you have voted against your wife and your girlfriend. You have done that. And if he wins, you're going to hurt them in very fundamental ways. If you haven't voted yet, then vote wisely. That's my closing argument. So go out and vote if you haven't voted yet, but vote wisely. Make your vote count for something, because we are entering November 5th, depending on what happens, the outcome of the elections. And I can say it frankly, if Trump wins November 5th, this country will not be as it was on November 4th, because he will begin to put in place the things that he has promised to dismantle the infrastructure of the civil service under Project 2025 as he gets set to fire people. He may even begin to act as if he's the president, because this is a man who knows no protocol or no bounds. He may even declare himself president and start to act. Who's going to stop him? The Supreme Court has virtually made him king, would have made him king to do anything he wants. Who's going to stop him? So this country would be changed for good. Is that what you want? Or do you want the stability to continue? It won't be the end of the thing on the 5th of November, because you can bet a whole lot of a slew of lawsuits are going to fly all over the place. But the judges are waiting for Trump. Come with them. And these lawyers that bring these lawsuits should have their law license threatened. Because once the people have certified the elections or declared that the elections are fair and have come up with a result, and you come to the courts with all kinds of frivolous lawsuits to waste the time of the court, your law license should be on the line, as far as I'm concerned. So it won't be the end of the matter. I hardly think we'll have any determination on the 5th of what the results are. But have no fear. It will be determined. And we hope that the side that stands on the side of democracy, respect for the dignity and the personhood of women and men, who wants to see this country progress, not just for a few, but for the many. That is where your vote ought to be. That is the kind of support that you must give, because you too are going to be affected by it. So I wish you well. Walk circumspectly, walk carefully, vote wisely, and be safe next Tuesday. All right, that will do it for me this evening. Let me thank you for joining me under the mango tree, and let me wish for you a very good night. And in whatever you do, just walk good. God bless.